We're getting dramatic new details on the anti-government protests in Iran. The State Department says the death toll could be as high as 1,000. The department also says it has video from November showing Iran's military forces using machine guns to mow down protesters. It has been very difficult to get a picture of what exactly is happening in the country because the Iranian regime shut down the internet. Earlier today, U.S. envoy to Iran, Brian Hook, detailed what transpired in this video.
Without warning, the IRGC opened fire on the protesters, killing several people. Many of the protesters fled to nearby marshlands to escape. The IRGC tracked them down and surrounded them with machine guns mounted on trucks. They then sprayed the protesters with bullets. Between the rounds of machine gun fire, the screams of the victims can be heard. In this one incident alone, the regime murdered as many as 100 Iranians and possibly more.
Behnam Ben Taleblu has been following the situation in Iran closely. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thank you for joining us. It's so hard right now to get a clear picture of what is going on in Iran, but what's been fueling these protests exactly? And is there any sign the regime will be softening its crackdown at all?
Well, great to be with you, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there because it's all about the big picture for the Iranian population. Since 2009, that was the Green Movement protest against the second term of the Ahmadinejad administration in Iran. The protests don't have a quest for reform. They have a quest for, in essence, revolution. They are grabbing onto all the third rails, breaking taboos, saying death to the dictator, chastising the regime for its foreign and security policy, and in some, they're chastising the revolutionary government in Iran for failing to put Iran first. This most recent protest follows previous protests that were initially driven by economic concerns, but quickly followed on to a mass political protest against the regime itself, which is why the Islamic Republic responded with such lethal force and so quickly, which is really unprecedented in the 40-year history of the Islamic Revolution.
And as you said, these protests started out with the economy. U.S. officials say Iran's economy is in significant trouble. The U.S. says it believes that's in part due to the sanctions, which are meant to punish Iran into negotiating a new nuclear deal. But let me ask you, Behnam, if the U.S. pushes Iran's economy to the breaking point, could that backfire from the U.S. perspective, or is an indigenous regime change beneficial to the U.S.?
Well, I think a more representative government would be first and foremost beneficial to the Iranian people. There have been protests against the Islamic Republic for almost as long as the Islamic Republic has been in power. So that's not a new phenomenon. What's new here is that Washington has resurrected every single sanction, every single penalty that was waived by the nuclear deal in a bid to get Tehran to come to the table for a much bigger, much broader, much better deal.
I guess my point is that U.S. strategy had one goal, and it seems to be creating a separate outcome. So how is that viewed by the U.S.? That's my question.
And actually, that's ironic because it's a measure of success. The more Iran lashes out, the more the regime gradually escalates its nuclear program, the more that can be read as a sign of sanctioned success. Tehran knows its foreign exchanges are dwindling. Brian Hook gave a public figure as to how low those foreign exchanges actually are for Iran. And this is the regime trying to establish its dominance at home, at abroad, and vis-a-vis the U.S., so that it has a good position should it ever need to get into negotiations after 2020.
Now, we've also confirmed that Iran has been sending ballistic missiles to Shiite militias in Iraq. Some of those missiles were intercepted by the U.S. Navy last week. Explain to us why Iran is doing this.
Well, we've seen the Iranian missile tests actually morph over time. The threat used to be, is Iran actually testing missiles on its own territory? Now it's the regime proliferating missiles, transferring missiles to Shiite proxies in Iraq, as well as, of course, to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are partners with Tehran. Iran is giving the Shiite militias in Iraq short-range ballistic missiles that can fly over 500, 600 kilometers, being able to target Israel. The fact that they're deployed in western Iraq gives the regime in Tehran a more in-depth kind of strategic defense. And vis-a-vis the Houthis in Yemen, this keeps the conflict in the Arabian Peninsula raging and proves that Tehran is not interested in peace there, but rather that Tehran is interested in baiting and bleeding Saudi Arabia, its main regional rival.
So the overall picture that I'm getting here is one of a country that is increasingly militaristic and increasingly less focused on helping its citizens, but just preserving power at all costs.
That's right. You know, you want to put a finer point on it. Iran has a post-revolutionary society and a revolutionary government. And the chasm between state and society is wide. And the Iranian people now have more in common with the Iraqi people and the Lebanese people who don't want Iran to be deployed across the region, but want Iran to basically put, for lack of a better word again, Iran first.
Fascinating when you think about the origins of the Iranian Revolution itself, correct? All right,
Exactly.
So the UK, France, and Germany have warned the UN that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. Iran's foreign minister denied this is the case. First off, what's the likely truth, and what should we make of all of this? Does it mean the U.S. sanctions are not necessarily deterring Iran?
So the letter by the E3, France, Germany, United Kingdom, was specifically about Iran's continued development and advancement of ballistic missiles that are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. And this is something that the regime admits it's doing. It admits that it's going to diversify the quantity and quality of its ballistic missile arsenal. Multiple American directors of national intelligence have said that Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is the largest in the entire Middle East. That is a very, very powerful statement. Iran uses these weapons to coerce, to deter, to intimidate, to punish. And so when Iran transfers some of these systems, we have to ask ourselves, is this just a transfer of a system, or is this a way for Iran to increase the range of some of its systems that could one day carry a nuclear warhead? So the fact that the E3 is stepping up on this issue is good. The question is, what is the UN going to do with all these reports and all this information about Iran's ballistic missile advancements?
All right, Behnam Ben Taleblu of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.